We've got a number of speakers that have worked on PSDS applications in the past quite successfully, and today is about sharing their expertise. I would say, could you keep any questions to the end, but feel free to include any questions in the chat, and we'll try and respond to them either now or after the event. I want to say a wee bit about the hub. So the Northwest Net Zero Hub is part of a network. We're funded by the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, and we provide a range of services to the public sector to help on decarbonisation, and my particular interest is decarbonising buildings. But we do the full gambit of advice and support to push the climate agenda forward. Each hub has their own resources, and for PSDS there is lots of information you can access. Good support there, and from all regions, and some of it is worth looking at even if you're not in that region, because they would give you good guidance and templates, and we're able to share that if you have a desire to see some of that information. Through our own website you can access quite a lot of information, and we do have links to Net Zero Go and Energy Systems Catapult guidance on public sector decarbonisation, which is very good. If you're in a council and have a .gov email, you can sign up for Net Zero Go. That platform has immense amount of information in it. So as I've said there, take advantage of the tools, the best practice guide, the case studies, everything that's in there, if you can access and register there. So PSDS, Scheme 3C, there is a number of things that it's worth thinking about. So it is focusing again on heat decarbonisation, and there is confirmed funding for this year, which the programme's over 2 financial years, and we understand that it's broadly balanced over the 2 years. The scheme encourages a whole building approach, so not just about heating, but once you're in that threshold, you need to look at decarbonising the building and working your way through other measures that will help to maximise the benefit of the transition measures. But there's lots of guidance available in the scheme from SALIX. There are web resources and webinars. All the information that's there is fantastic. Take advantage of colleagues from SALIX. Ask them questions if you're unsure. They respond usually within 2 or 3 days, and they do have very, very good support network in making the application. So don't feel alone. There's a lot there, although we're here today to try and supplement some of that information to help you along the way. We've got, the Hub can't recommend people, but we've looked at folk who have done, our companies that have done successful applications over the past few years, and we're bringing together some very good experience and expertise here to try and help you with the practical side of looking at how to put your application together. And we're taking advantage of them to get their knowledge and know-how out to the public. So it's all good, and hopefully you'll gain a lot from today's session, because you want to know what to expect from that expertise and what to ask for as you move forward into putting an application together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with inviting Andrew to come and speak to us, and Andrew Wholley from Mott Macdonald. He's been a long-term inmate of the energy profession, and I'm sure we'll be bringing you a lot to understand from this presentation. Andrew, over to you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Eddie and Reece, and hello everyone. Really nice to meet you today, albeit virtually. So I've got a few slides. I'm sharing them online. Hopefully you can all see that okay. Yeah, thanks. About 20 minutes. What I'll do is a quick introduction to myself and then run through some of the, I guess, the key themes that I think are perhaps important or pertinent to this programme. Just for those of you that don't know me, I'm Andrew Wholley. I'm a senior associate in Mott Macdonald's Net Zero Advisory team. Not going to bore you too much with the Mott Macdonald background, but a sort of a large engineering and management and development consultancy, and specifically for today, sort of focusing on our infrastructure expertise, which I sit in this team, but we do cover quite a lot of disciplines and sort of multi-sectorial. In respect of PSDS experience, and again, thanks for the opportunity to talk. We've got support, we've got experience and support in helping organisations develop heat decarbonisation plans through things like the Low Carbon Skills Fund and other procurement routes, and also supporting author some capital applications, mainly for the Health Trust typically, but some experience with other public sector organisations. We've also undertaken due diligence roles where we've sort of been brought on to do QA checks of applications in advance of submissions, so overseeing a number sort of at once, providing a bit of a critical eye role, and through some engagement that we do with GEP Environmental, and Glyn's here today to provide more info on that. We do provide some support to Salix financing and reviewing applications as well, so a bit of a breadth of experience there. And for the purposes today, I was going to probably just focus at quite a high level, but on sort of three key themes really. Strategic planning, that's a few slides for each of these sets, but understanding the PSDS scheme as Eddie's already set out and all the good data that's already there. Understanding your estates and prioritising programmes, making sure any strategic planning aligns to the application. There's obviously lots of good work that can go in by consultants or yourselves, but also always having that end goal of what the application asks and trying to align those, and suitably resourcing projects. That is a bit of a challenge, I appreciate, but suitable resourcing is key. Then looking at some of the clear technical solutions. So really effectively how sort of developing detailed heat decarbonisation plans. I probably won't amount of detail because I know some of the colleagues on this call will be doing that as well, but just some of the key things like evidencing material, strong costing focus, etc., that I'll touch on briefly, and then perhaps importantly as well the business case aspect of things as well. It's not just good technical solutions, it's having that robust business case, so you're looking and you're being clear about your project management approach and governance and risks, etc. So just starting with strategic planning, Eddie's already done it and already given some really good information. You might see a few of these graphics today, but just to say, obviously PSDS is a very well set up scheme. So it's got a huge amount of useful data on their website, and the downloads, etc. So just reading through that, really, even things like events that they plan, they do some very good events that sort of talk you through this, probably similar to this, but definitely well suggest that you sit on those, and really just some of the key criteria. Again, a few of us might talk about this today, and Eddie started it, but obviously it is opening quite soon, so not a huge amount of time until the new one opens. Talks about the 230 million, and interestingly over 2 financial years this year, which buys a bit more time, maybe a bit more strategic planning and project prioritisation. As Eddie said, a heat decarb focus, though it does allow multi-energy efficiency, and then some of those key factors that obviously drive the projects as well, making sure you have got the contribution, the 12% contribution that has to be made by the public sector, and things like the CCT of £325 per lifetime tonne. There's some challenging metrics that need to be considered right from the outset, really, in terms of how you develop and prioritise programmes. From an estate perspective, it's just understanding some of that and really evidencing your knowledge of your estates. Obviously, you know your estates much better than anyone else, but a big part, and I think evidencing is something that will probably come up quite a lot in this, but it's engaging at the strategic stage relevant organisational staff, so you're clear on your estate and its operations. Understand how retrofit programmes will impact on that. Satisfying simple things at the early outset as well, satisfying that these buildings have a useful economic life, that they have got a service need up to sort of net zero plans, etc. So it's just being clear that these are the buildings we want to invest in and they have that priority. Thinking about opportunities and constraints as well, it does. Again, you'll know that, but it does support particularly projects and fossil fuel systems that end of useful economic life. So it prioritises some of those sites, and also thinking things like constraints. So where buildings are heavily encased in asbestos, etc., that does bring a lot of challenges that you might not want to prioritise for the scheme. And ultimately, it's evidencing that really just to support that business case. You've been through that process, that strategic engagement with your team, with relevant people, and you're choosing the right buildings that ultimately leads to this prioritised programmes and prioritised studies. And what I would say is that prioritising quality over quantity, and I think some of our other colleagues will be saying this as well, there is a finite amount of funds. So seeking to fund the best projects that you might have rather than trying to maximise investment might be a more successful route with all this support. In terms of planning the application as well, so some key things in there: having a capable team, having a good project management presence. It doesn't have to be full-time, but a dedicated project manager is really going to be quite key, just to make sure consistency, communication lines, etc., are maintained and evidence to Salix. Procuring the right experienced external support where you need it is obviously important, and just making sure you're considering that and who you bring about. I talked about this briefly earlier, but the development of studies and business cases, just trying to align any technical studies and the outcomes of technical studies to the application form, is a real synergy that we could and should be looking for. There's obviously certain amounts of information that needs to be evidenced in the pack. There's certain calculations and information that needs to be provided. If you can't do it yourself, just make sure it's in any consultant packs, etc., and that effectively the outputs from any external advisory matches the needs that are going to go into the application form, just for efficiency. Also, simple things like using Salix's persistence factors, data sets, carbon emissions values, all of those sorts of things. Align it as best as you can. Another thing is also just getting this buy-in to revenue impacts. A lot of us are obviously aware that heat decarbonisation doesn't typically come with a great MPV or a life cycle benefit. Appreciate where we can do it with energy efficiency, it might be a saving over business as usual. But in some instances, it's not going to be, and it's going to be negative. And proving that you've got the commercial buy-in, or at least bringing finance colleagues on board about why we're doing this, even if it's grant funding, if it's going to affect bottom lines and revenues, it's having that engagement early doors so that you don't have any nasty surprises as you move forward. Evidencing data, so certainly with information that's collated, Salix obviously have a lot to review at any one time. They need to evidence a lot of these criteria that are being met. So simple things like including drawings and photos and record information in accessible packs are really, really beneficial. Otherwise, you'll end up just getting lots of clarifications and potential frustrations from reviewers. And submitting good time. So I'm sure all of us will say this: the portal, when it is open, is not open for long. Having everything ready on good time that you can pretty much just go when it opens is going to be absolutely key. In terms of technical solutions, obviously you do need a strong technical solution. You need to evidence that it's appropriate for your buildings. A lot of the projects that are successful are based around clear and robust heat decarbonisation programs that consider efficiency first and the lean, clean, green, but they obviously satisfy why they've chosen this building, why fossil fuel is going to be reduced and mitigated and removed. I'd also suggest where you can and where you can afford to involve as many disciplines as possible. A lot of the risks will come in, obviously, things like DNO connections and sizings, but making sure you've got cost early doors is important to make sure that it's achievable and right metrics that are being used. But civil structural as well, obviously a lot of, particularly with heat decarbonisation, there are impacts on civil structural that are not cheap if there are additional works that are needed or new structures that are needed to be built or remediated. The other one, I talked about that earlier, but again, just existing asset information, make sure your assets are eligible for it. There's things like boiler ages, useful economic lives, etc. Just some of those key things. Make sure they prioritised early on. The next couple of slides are really just identifying where there's this focus on heat decarbonisation, and really energy efficiency. It can only be, I think, 58% of any project in terms of cost, but they're going to be the ones that give you this return on investment. The heat decarbonisation is really these sort of be lean, be green technologies that do challenge return on investments, etc. So it is about getting the right balance of projects that satisfy commercials as much as technical outcomes. Again, just another way of showing that in terms of splitting it by energy conservation measures. But those early, typical sort of simple early wins are obviously less attractive to Salix in terms of funding. There were some of the earlier schemes, and they really are interested in these sort of be lean, be green technologies that do have a challenging commercial impact. So just being clear that you're aware of this and that you're still applying for it, and you're gearing up for this step change, and you have considered it. There's some, I'm not going to go into the detail of a good heat decarb plan. I think some of my colleagues will do today, but there are also good experiences out there, sectorial guidance that you can lean on. For the NHS, for instance, there's the 4-step decarb plan. It's a really good plan if you're an NHS trust and sort of follow through and use the sectorial guidance as well as sort of national. Really, when we're talking about heat decarb, we're looking at step 3 here, this sort of switch to non-fossil fuel. But what we do is we want to make sure it is informed by those earlier stages. We're not just jumping straight into a heat pump for, without considering all the sort of the be lean, be clean, and that you've done all those other appraisals and sort of de-risk the project before looking at the solution. And also evidence in the pathway to decision. So where you've ruled out certain technologies, even if it's qualitative, if you've got a study that does that, it's a real positive to say, we have looked at all of these things, but this is our preferred solution, and here's all the evidence to satisfy why this is a priority and should be funded. A few sort of stumbling blocks potentially on the technical side: planning. If you've got planning complications, particularly for things like heat pumps or new energy centres, making sure that is considered. Electrical capacities, I'm sure we'll all talk about that, particularly for electrification of heat, is a real challenge. DNOs are typically very, very slow to respond, also expensive, so just building that into your programme and risk. The civil structural implications, if you're looking at ground source, obviously making sure you've looked at things like GIs or engaged appropriate levels of detailed analytics at the application stage, and the cost and risk with those. Costing. Ideally, you would have tender information or responses or quotes from technology providers or contractors, but appreciate not all projects will. So if you're not, it's just trying to engage a suitably qualified QS or in-house costing metrics, using robust cost metrics that are evidenced in the market and that are proving true costs. Also, don't forget things like OHP, inflation, all the simple things that a QS would obviously bring in that we sometimes forget when we're just taking a quote from a contractor and applying it. And then asset data. And again, it's a message I've said a number of times before, but a lot of the information will be satisfying that your existing assets are eligible and evidencing those. And if you've got people going out to sites, get them to take photos, etc. Otherwise, you're going to have to end up going back or pestering caretakers or operations staff for that type of information. So once people are there, try and prioritise and make that efficient in terms of the data that you collect. Otherwise, there will be lots of clarifications. And then finally, just sort of looking at the business case side, a strong business case is needed as much as a strong technical solution. Talked about dedicated project management. Again, it doesn't have to be full time, but having someone that is responsible for the project, that will be the communications lead with Salix and probably the project program, is key. It just shows that you've got a dedication to the project, you're really taking it seriously. The commercial, legal and management sides are obviously important as well. You might not be as far progressed with some of those aspects, but if you're not, just using the risk register to identify where you're currently at on those different elements and just satisfying that there is a process in place to de-risk that in terms of use of frameworks or standard form contracts, that you've got the right people in-house or externally that will support with those elements as well moving forward. So if you haven't got to the bottom of everything yet, use the risk register wisely and look at those mitigation measures. And achieving an achievable program is key. Being clear with your steps, having a good Gantt chart is really helpful, just to show that you've clearly identified the next steps and that you're going to fit within. It's less of an issue potentially this year with a 2-year financial year program and delivery within programs, but do bring that in. And governance is another one as well. Make sure you've got the key stage reviews or internal governance stages, etc. in there. If you've got I know some of our clients we work with have got quite challenging governance stages, even to go to tender and then to contract and then to pay. You're building those governance arrangements into the program so that you're satisfied you can achieve on program. And then some of this supporting information that we're a good organogram showing who your project manager is, who the project sponsor is, where that sort of leads in terms of governance boards, identifying potentially how it will be managed with and what broader team you're bringing into the program, so that you're satisfying that it's not just on a whim. You have got a good structure for this project and you're going to be supported. I'm not going to go on again about the commercial issues, but some graphics here just sort of showing when we looked at forecasting electrification of heat in the past, and particularly using future forecasts and emissions factors, this sort of impact of electrification of heat can be significant. But considering the other measures, etc., just understanding that commercial impact. And then lastly, procurement and contracting routes. Just again, engaging with your procurement colleagues, understanding the different procurement routes. There's things like energy performance contracts, and some of you might already be in those, and I'm sure people will talk about that later in terms of refit programs, etc., and the benefits of existing partner organisations and framework contractors that can help you with this. Use it if they are there. Do use it. They bring a lot of experience, skills, expertise, and sometimes free help to this to do it. If you haven't got that, don't be afraid to still be looking at other frameworks that are out there, or even things like maintenance contracts. You might have good maintenance contracts, maintenance providers that can offer some of these works. But ultimately, if you haven't got to go to ODU, just making sure you've got your own procurement teams involved and you allow the right programs and engagement. You might not be finalising those positions, but again, just using the risk register to mitigate how you've looked at it and how you will appraise it or address it at next stages. And then just a couple of additional hints and tips. This is just each of these numbers here and names here are just the tabs from the application form. There is quite a lot in the application form. We said it earlier. For you to be aware of it ASAP, get involved in the application form now, right at the outset, understand what's being asked, what level of information, help it inform briefs, etc. But I would say quite a lot of it is informed by a good technical study and a business case. If you get those right, a lot of the info will fall out of those in terms of the application. So it's just about aligning those. And then lastly, some key things: consistency in data. There's possibly nothing worse as a reviewer of one figure goes on one tab, it's a different on another tab, and then the supporting information says something else. It just doesn't drive confidence. So good QA before submission. Make sure you're aligning all figures. It is really recommended. The other thing, sell the opportunity. The project introduction gives you an opportunity to say, why is this project unique? It's quite qualitative, but just if you can go through and satisfy that this is a really interesting project for the sector, for your organisation, it's a real priority for you, it's an opportunity to sell it. There's going to be lots of applications. You use that as an ability to say why it is appropriate and why this project should be funded. And then lastly, if you can respond to clarifications in a timely manner, it always keeps the reviewers quite happy, and it's probably beneficial. I'm not sure we could probably say that as a formal. You obviously have a certain amount of times to respond, but it goes down to having that dedicated PM or communication line. Obviously, if you can't respond quickly, just put holding notes in, etc., to make sure you are taking it seriously. And that's it. Sorry, bit of a rattle through, but welcome the opportunity to present and happy to take any questions later.
Thank you, Andrew. That was really good. It shows that there is an awful lot in there, but I really like the tips at the end. I think that's useful information for people to be thinking about, especially that early engagement with the form and to getting their head together on their projects. So great, thank you. I'm sure other people have put a question in the chat for you. I'm sure other people will be loading up the questions quite soon, but yeah, thank you. Now, Turner and Townsend are another one that's been involved in an awful lot of projects and bring a lot of experience here. So I'm going to invite Chris to now talk, and we'll see what benefit we can get from there. Thank you.
Yeah, afternoon all. Thanks for your time. We're going to be presenting here today. Probably going to touch a lot on what Andy's just touched upon. I think what I'd like to do as part of this presentation is go through what I think and what we see as kind of being key to the PSDS application process, and then kind of touch on HDPs and heath decarbonisation plans in terms of how we've seen those be rationalised and what we think best practices at the moment, to kind of take those forward. I'll quickly touch upon who we are. My slides will move. If you don't know us, we're a professional services company. We operate around the globe. More and more, we're getting known for things outside of our normal project management and cost management provision services. We now have a sustainability team that is across the UK of about 150 sustainability professionals who mainly work on non-domestic retrofit and domestic retrofit on kind of government programs like SHRA and the HUG program, for example. So we're kind of hopefully well placed to kind of help organisations with retrofit, with building decarb, and kind of program management, funding applications more broadly. Offer a range of services which aren't really relevant to this conversation, but it's always nice just to drop that in there. In terms of where we are with the public sector decarbonisation scheme, I think we all know that kind of public sector accounts for quite a significant amount in terms of building carbon emissions, and all our organisations have interim targets, have climate emergency targets that have been set between now and 2050 to try and reduce those, and central government have tried to align kind of what they want to do across the public sector in terms of support. So PSDS so far has kind of kicked off with about 2 billion worth of funding over the last few years and the few waves since the scheme started. We're currently delivering phase 3B on a lot of projects. Some people might just be coming at the end of installation or kind of just be in commission phase, and then we're expecting phase 3C to kick off at some point in October, with 3.25 million expected. In terms of our involvement across the project life cycle, we've been involved in projects in 3B with a value of, about 72 million. That's been anything from PSD application preparation, putting them together for organisations, mainly local authorities, support through the refit framework that Andy's just mentioned previously, but also kind of the direct delivery of HDPs and kind of training and kind of upskilling elements around that. In terms of setting up for a successful application, we've got a general process what we try to follow, which is on the right hand side of the screen, but I'll go through in the next few slides. I think it's safe to say that all organisations know what PSDS are, but everyone has a certain level of maturity in terms of either being successful with applications, maybe unfortunately not being successful with applications, but also in the maturity in terms of delivery of low carbon heating projects, renewable projects, but then also kind of whole system retrofit in general. Despite all of that, and where you land in that landscape of maturity, sorry, my screen's just flicking through without me pressing any buttons, so sorry for that. Depending on where you land within that landscape, the funding is competitive. The funding window is only open for a certain amount of time, so organisations need to prepare, plan, and really push forward with projects to get on there. Sometimes it comes to the very last minute. You're one of the first in the queue to submit the application, and that's just by merit of being in the right place at the right time because you're in the queue to submit your application. In terms of things that we deem kind of that are important to the application, one of the key things is stakeholder engagement. So the earlier you do stakeholder engagement, the better. It's really key. So engaging your senior leadership, trying to map out how diverse your stakeholders are. Are you planning projects in schools? Do you have commercial tenants that are in these properties? Are there community groups that you need to be involved? But then also, if you're looking at a kind of a refurb of a heritage asset, do you need to submit any planning applications? Do you need to submit anything to the DNO? Things that we've seen organisations be successful at in the past are kind of getting internal members briefing packs, tenant information packs, and kind of mailing lists built out around projects, so people can be kind of updated as the application and as the project is built out. The next key thing is building data. You don't need to have the best data in the world, but you need to have some element of data. You don't necessarily need half-hourly data. Monthly data is sufficient to kind of build out a profile for your building, but you need to understand where it's coming from and what you actually need to submit as part of the application form to get there. But then also, do you have a full kind of appreciation of your building systems, your HVAC, your controls, actually what systems you might be looking at in terms of the project and what systems you might be updating. To paint a picture of that, it's really just starting to collect what data you've got, where your data streams come from, and actually who the right people are within organisations. One of the big things we see is a disparity in data between different parts of organisations. Similarly, that's sometimes between local authorities and the schools that they manage, insofar as someone pays the bills, but someone actually manages the energy on site. So engaging with stakeholders and finding out where those bottlenecks are in the early stages is kind of one of the things that we see hold organisations up in terms of progressing applications and progressing projects. I think we've touched on this earlier as well in terms of what PSDS is looking for. It's looking for projects to take a whole building approach and appreciating what is in there, understanding your energy, your baseline, your current targets, and what your current policies are internally, but then also trying to put that in the context of what the PSDS eligibility criteria is, and then moving through improved energy efficiency, reducing your demands, putting in energy efficiency controls and things like that, looking to move to kind of a decarbonised heating solution and removing fossil fuel from the site, which I think for most of us is going to involve some level of electrification, and reviewing that in the context of actually, do we need to supplement that with something like PV if we're going to put a heat pump in, for example. The next stage is that technical solution that Andy's already touched upon in terms of identifying specific measures that you want to do, but also specific measures that you need to do. In the context of the application, there'll always be the argument, well, actually, these are the things that we really want to do, but these are the things that fit within our kind of asset life cycle and normal maintenance regime. So some of that will fall into the project scope and some of it will fall out. So trying to have a clear demarcation of what goes into the project, what doesn't go into the project at a really early stage. And that'll be part of your decarbonisation plan, your feasibility study element, to kind of build that out. And that might help you start to prioritise sites and buildings and sets of buildings that you want to put forward for your application. I think one of the things we're all really familiar with is kind of development of that business case. Does the project fit within kind of what you're doing internally in terms of what types of buildings you want to prioritise, where budget spend is allocated, and what you're able to take forward. But then also, does that project stack up in terms of kind of the money that you'll have to spend to reduce carbon? And then finally, as part of that, just are there any blockers in terms of kind of council sign off, in terms of director sign off within your organisation? Because sometimes those mileposts move. There's generally strategic board meetings September, October time, budgets start to get set and discussed. So have you engaged early enough to be able to kind of get some of that money from that budget and get that allocated to your project to meet the match funding requirements at PSDS? Not every project will require a full OBC and a full FBC in kind of full detail as the Green Book live business case sets out, but it's a good cyclical process to use to kind of review a project and just re-rationalize why you're doing certain things in terms of your strategic, your economic, and your management cases. And hopefully it'll allow you to better define your project strengths and kind of any areas of risk. In terms of procurement, there's a lot of things to consider in terms of procurement. One goes back to that maturity level of your organisation. Do you have the capacity and experience and in-house expertise to be able to deliver these projects on your own, or do you need a consultant to help you do the feasibility element and the initial design elements? But then also, can you rely on your existing maintenance contractors to help with kind of post-installation maintenance? Are they specialists in heat pumps? Do they understand those systems, or do you need a specialist to come in and assist with those elements? The next bit is the design and build contract element. What do you actually need from a contractor? What are your requirements? That might be your set technical requirements if you've got a more innovative project, or you've got certain SLAs that you need to meet internally. You might actually just want to build contract, and then you've got an incumbent maintenance provider who's going to look after it. Or you might want something a bit more robust, and you might want to go for a full DBOM project and have the same service provider through the full length of the project lifecycle. The next is in terms of kind of when you can draw down grant funding, when you can allocate budgets, what's your master program and kind of your delivery requirements. And then post installation, what are your considerations for commissioning and verification on site? How's that going to work? Is that written into the contract? Is that someone else that's going to be providing that? And kind of getting your scope and your outline scope set out at an early stage is really important to do. Now, once we've sussed out what we're going to do procurement wise, we're probably in a position where hopefully we've been successful with our application. But that's not the end of the project, obviously. We need to be already thinking about what we're going to do with project installation, what the contract SLAs are, how's that set up? Do you need a project manager? Is that project manager going to be an employer's agent? How is that going to be set up? Will it be a tier one contractor? How will they go through? And then that feeds into your kind of your master program. And some of the things we've seen projects kind of get stuck upon, or kind of on the kind of side there, in terms of if you've got ground source heat pumps and you've got lots of civils that you've got to do. Sometimes the drawdown from PSDS in the past is quite quick. It's quite a demanding time period to be able to deliver a project. So trying to install ground source heat pumps with boreholes in the winter through frozen ground and kind of really bad conditions has held up projects and meant kind of abandoned work and void work. So those things need to be considered. Likewise, if you're looking at doing decarbonisation of kind of high traffic buildings like schools and hospitals that are occupied for much longer than kind of office buildings and things like that, work is going to be disruptive. That stakeholder engagement piece is really important to get right early on. And ideally, you want to be planning for kind of holidays and weekends where the buildings are hopefully a little bit less occupied. And then finally, just a word of warning in terms of low carbon heating systems and commissioning of systems. Upgrade heating systems in the winter at your peril. It can't be avoided, but hopefully with planning the application, planning the delivery and considering it all holistically, that can be avoided. Touch on quickly, because this is where we see some projects kind of fall foul, and that's in terms of what you buy and what you plan to install isn't always what you get. It's really important to consider kind of monitoring and targeting as part of kind of any project delivery, and that's really planning for who will commission it, who will test it, and will someone provide third-party verification? Because what you want to know is you want to know that the carbon savings that you're expecting at design stage are the carbon savings that you're going to get over the next 3, 4, 5, 10 years in the lifespan of that asset. The EPC, so the energy performance contract frameworks that are available around kind of are very, very good. The refit one that Townsend kind of operate on as a set number of service providers that kind of guarantee that carbon saving and that carbon performance over the project. It takes you with one service provider throughout that entire process. So they are very good for keeping that in, but not the right fit for every organisation. But we would recommend looking at things like the International Performance Metric for Metering and Verification Processes, the IPMVP standard, to help with commissioning and monitoring and making sure that actually those savings are embedded in the project for its lifespan. I'm going to quickly pause there. I think the next thing I'm going to quickly rattle through are a few slides just on heat decarbonisation plans. We've done a lot of work in this area, similar to the energy systems catapult, in terms of providing kind of guidance and templates around what is considered best practice in the heat decarbonisation space for heat decarbonisation plans. That's mainly on the back of the Low Carbon Skills Fund being one of the primary enablers for PSDS and organisations to kind of go through that feasibility stage element. So routinely, what we've tried to do is we've got a template that's freely available online for the North East and Yorkshire Hub that we produced it for. I'll share links after this webinar, which essentially sets up a feasibility report and a reporting template that roughly aligns with the tabs that are in the PSDS application form. And one of the main takeaways from that is actually what we don't want is we don't want a short form report with loads and loads of technical appendices that we've got to do a deep dive into to get the data that we need for the application process. We want everything to be long form, long-handed calculations. So actually, as we read through the narrative of the project, we can fill in the template as we go, and it's fairly easy for the organisation or the person filling in the application form to understand the methodology, where the data came from, and why you're actually doing certain things. So this really touches on things that we've already touched on before. It's the purpose introduction. Who are you as an organisation? Are you looking at an individual site, a cluster of buildings, or kind of a tranche of buildings under an application? And what are the specific design solutions? What's your current like for placement cost, for example, your age, your state of maintenance, your buildings, general typology of the building, its archetype, its age, and elements like that, and make sure that that is robust enough and you understand what that is in the application fit. Because that's the first thing that the assessors for PSDS will look at from a sales perspective. The next bit is again around data. It's not necessarily about the granularity of your data. It's understanding what data you have and how you're going to use it and how that translates into the application form. So making sure that actually this is written into your scope for your HDPs is really useful, because it just means that any consultant that's doing the work for you has to collate that data and actually put it in a usable format for you, rather than you having to do that back end work to say, well, where did this come from and where did that come from? The next element is, as we've touched on before, touching the whole building approach, trying to develop pragmatic solutions to remove fossil fuels. So are there any quick wins that you can do that? Might be low cost or no cost options. So they don't need to be part of your PSDS application, but it sets you up for success because you're already taking those small incremental steps to get there. Things like identifying, is there a local existing heat network which is a lower carbon option than you've already got? So you can try and decarbonize at a faster pace. But then also, what do you need to do to prepare the site for low carbon solutions? So that is generally engagement with the DNO, understanding your capacity and taking that forward. And then what you need to do to plan, calculate your savings and kind of take that forward. Like with any other project, the next piece of the decarbonisation plan should be challenges and costs. What are the technical, logisticals and kind of planning constraints specific to the site? If you're a local authority, actually planning challenges are often easier to overcome than other public sector organisations, because that planning officer sits within your remit. You engage them quite freely before you submit that planning application. And then other things like, do you have an asbestos register? Do you understand if there's been any works or any asbestos works within the building? And can you wrap that all up within a robust enough risk register across the project delivery? Delivery plan and risk, again, we're touching on the program. Can you set out an outline program from an early stage? So you've got your HDP, you understand what your preferred technologies are and what your carbon saving potentials are. Which measures are you going to select, and can you start building out a program? So actually, if capital funding does land from day one, you've already got a robust enough program and set of risks that you can take forward, rather than trying to consider it last minute. I think the next element, which probably takes us slightly away from PSDS, is understanding, PSDS is the flagship scheme from the government in terms of funding support, but it's not the only funding support that's out there. And actually, some of the work that you want to do might not fall under PSDS, or it might be ineligible, or mean that your application scores slightly worse than it would without asking for that specific element. So there's lots of regional funding pots. There's kind of PIF loan schemes around that are available that I'm happy to talk people through. That can help you do enabling works, that can help you do kind of energy efficiency measures, install new things like BMS systems that prepare you for a lot of the things that you want to do as part of a bigger capital application on the PSDS, like installing a heat pump or like installing kind of a set of PVs and doing those fabric measures. That's it from me. If you want to connect or drop us a message, my email's there, or you can scan the QR code as we go forward. But thanks for listening. Hopefully that was useful.
That was fantastic, Chris. I'm so glad you went over the points about the heat decarbonisation plan, because it's such a key document, and being able to prepare your application and having a decent quality one is such a boost trying to get the information together. So thank you for that. I have put a question in. I'm inviting other people to ask questions to you. It was mentioned earlier by Andrew, but I think Glyn is older than all the funding streams that have come along. So he's been around a while and he's bringing a fair bit of experience. So I invite you, Glyn, to give us the benefit of these years.
Okay, hello everybody. Hopefully you can all hear me.
Yes.
Yes, good. So same as Andrew and Chris, thanks for inviting us to do this. And so a very brief little bit of information about GEP Environmental. So I mean, we're actually a much smaller consultancy, project engineering consultancy. So we are part of the larger Mabot group. So in total, we're about 120 engineers across the whole group. GEP itself is actually around about 35 engineers. We have done a lot of work in the PSDS sector since phase 1 came along, whenever it was, 3 or 4 years ago now. As Eddie's kind of alluded to, I've been in the sector for a long time, 20 years plus of director experience around energy efficiency, renewables, and general project engineering programs. We are one of the technical advisors to SAILEX, along with 5 other technical advisors who were commissioned back in, I think I'm right in saying it was October 2021, to provide the technical due diligence support services to SAILEX in terms of assessing PSDS applications. So I have kind of picked out some areas as we go through the presentation, which really are, if you like, lessons learned from our side when assessing the applications, in terms of what we look out for and where where unfortunately some of the public sector organisations have slipped up in terms of what they've actually covered or how they've covered it within their application. But we do sit client side as well. We've worked with a number of client sides public sector clients who've successfully applied for PSDS funding with our support. We delivered heat decarbonisation plans through to REBA stage 4. That's predominantly at the client's sort of request, albeit I think generally heat decarbonisation plans to REBA stage 2 with some elements of stage 3, predominantly to do preparation work for engagement with the DNO, will normally suffice and give you strong enough evidence for the application. So moving on from who we are, so just following partly some of the structure, and there will be some repetition unfortunately from what you've heard before, but hopefully there'll be some new stuff as well, is just some of the key benefits of the public sector decarbonisation scheme. I mean, it does allow public sector organisations of all sizes to apply for an element of grant funding, and it also, the whole PSDS scheme, which doesn't only include for the capital application, but also includes for the low carbon skills fund for the pre-capital support. So it does combine the two, which means that there is the situation where organisations, and whether they're large or small, with can source the right skill set from within the consultancy or the technical advisory or the project engineering marketplace. And because we're now in the 4th phase effectively of PSDS, that SAILEX do conduct a lot of feedback, both with the likes of ourselves as one of the technical advisors out into the consultancy market, as well as clients themselves, to try and improve the process. And I think we've seen a number of improvements, specifically I think between phase 1 to phase 3A and then 3A to 3B. In reality, there's not a lot of change between 3B and 3C. So, on that basis, I think SAILEX are happy with where the programme has got to, and, if you like, the level of challenge or level of detail that's required within the PSDS applications, that they've kind of reached a point where it's in a reasonable level of equilibrium. So again, a little bit of repetition, but as we all know, it is just around the corner. In terms of phase 3C opening, we are anticipating an early to mid-October for the window to open. It could come a little bit sooner than that, so we do need to bear that in mind, that that last year it was delayed because of the political issues that were going on, if you remember, in the autumn of last year. So so the clients that we're working with, we are, you know, are working on the basis of trying to get certainly all the input that would be required for an application available by the end of September, just in case this window opens a little bit sooner than you know, perhaps everybody's anticipating. So there is around about the 230 million available for financial year spend 24-25, and roughly the same amount is likely to be available for 25-26. That does depend to an extent on what happens on 3B, because obviously there are a number of abandonments of programs of work through various reasons, and that some of that funding at least does get recycled into the PSDS program. So it could be that nominal round about 230 million could become a bit more than that. Again, we touched on this, but Salex run good webinars. They're informative. I would advise also going on to the Q&A sessions, because they run webinar sessions and they run separate Q&A sessions. I've actually found the Q&A sessions to be more informative than the webinars, because in reality the webinars are going through the guidance document or some of the key points of the guidance document. So I mean, hopefully potential applicants have already been through the guidance documents before the webinars, you know, before the webinars take place. So key criteria, there's 325 per lifetime of carbon saved. That's still remains as was. Obviously that's calculated based upon the persistence factors of the different technologies that are built within the application form and are visible within the application form. Again, minimum applicant contribution of 12%, the same as it was for 3B. So in some ways that's quite a good outcome, because at one point we were expecting that may increase to as high as 20%. Obviously that means that they can support more organisations. And energy efficiency measures can't exceed 58% of the grant value. It's probably worth mentioning at this point, although it's not in the presentation as such, that one of the preparation areas that, you know, you have to think about how you are going to fund the shortfalls, because typically, and I think Chris picked up on this point about potentially alternative funding, because, you know, typically what we've seen is that the grant portion, if you like, is covering nominally within a range of about 55 to 80% of the total project cost, which obviously means that the public sector organisation is going to have to find that, you know, 20 to 45% of the total project cost, which is obviously a sizable amount of money, or at least it can be on some of the larger schemes. So, and that's something to think about as you go through the preparation in terms of what you are actually going to apply for in terms of the various energy efficiency or enabling measures against the, you know, against the sort of direct carbon heat related measures whereby the full sort of decarbonisation factor does apply to those measures. So that's something to do some scenario planning about, which I will touch on as we go through. So again, obviously a little bit of repetition, but good planning ahead, engagement with support organisations, whatever they may be. They could be existing suppliers. I think Andrew mentioned framework suppliers who perhaps are prepared to do this upfront work to help clients to put in hopefully successful applications on the basis that that they may already be procured as part of a framework, and therefore obviously it's helping them to be supporting live projects as they move forward. Think about the timelines, demonstrate programs. Is it going to be viable to do a single or a multi-year project? Single-year programs of work are obviously very challenging in the real world. So again, the more preparation you can do in terms of the design work, for example, before the actual capital funding year opens on the 1st of April, then obviously that's given you a much better chance of achieving a single year timeline. You've got to think about the disruption to the building and the users and how you're going to fit that in, and whether that pushes it, sort of without beyond any reasonable doubt into a multi-year program. There was evidence of some multi-year proposals that SAILEX were trying to approach some of the applicants to see if there was a possibility of moving it to a single year program. Obviously the multi-year program was oversubscribed much quicker, and that is something to think about. But at the end of the day, you can't commit to something that just physically is not possible, so be cautious about that. We talked about speed in terms of the application. I mean, certainly we've seen funding pots filling up within, literally minutes of the portal opening. So therefore, it is critical to have all the information to hand in a format which is easily transferable into the portal when completing the online forms. So a few minutes could actually be decisive one way or the other in terms of whether your application gets taken forward into the full due diligence process. The other thing is just a little point is think about the size of the folders or files that you're trying to upload, because actually that can prolong the upload speed. And again, you could be sort of prolonging the process by a couple of the minutes that could be decisive. So I'm just going to, as I said, just based on the experience of doing the technical due diligence, just want to pick up on a couple of areas that have tripped up a number of applicants. And to be fair, the guide, once SAILEX produce good guidance, there's a little bit of vagueness around some of these in terms of how it's laid out in the guidance, and we've had quite a few situations where during the technical due diligence that there's been a lot of back and forth between the applicant and SAILEX to define whether something is eligible or not. But at the end of the day, the scheme requires that an end-of-life fossil fuel boiler is removed. You will not have an eligible scheme unless part of that scheme is the removal of a fossil fuel boiler replaced by a low carbon heating solution, which predominantly in most cases is going to be a heat pump solution. And SAILEX do require clear evidence to demonstrate the age and the condition of every fossil fuel boiler that's to be removed or indeed retained within the scheme. Now, why retained? Well, because in fact, I'll move on to the next slide. If you're looking at potentially a scheme that is bivalent in nature, as in there is an element of low carbon heating design, new solution, as well as retention of fossil fuel boiler or boilers, then those fossil fuel boilers that are to be retained in that scheme have to be, cannot be classified as end of life. And that's unless there is some specific criteria, which, for example, on the last bullet point, where there is statutory requirements around certain sectors, for example, the NHS, that require additional resilience from different fuel sources. So, but in the main, that you cannot you cannot retain a boiler in the scheme, a fossil fuel boiler that is not deemed to be end of life. And the end of life criteria, whilst this is a nominal figure, it is around 10 years old. I mean, whether you agree with that or not, that's the benchmark that SAILEX have set. But they will consider certain situations whereby, again, if certain evidence is provided about the condition of the boilers, or perhaps the very, very extensive operating hours that the boiler has had to endure, then consideration at something that is slightly less than 10 years can be considered. It's also important to note that no new fossil fuel plant can be installed as part of the scheme. Now, that's even if it's paid for by the applicant. So if you're trying to determine a bivalent system with a fossil fuel boiler, which is a brand new boiler, which is being procured directly or funded directly by the applicant, it's still not eligible in terms of the scheme. So again, that's an area that has caused some problems. Yeah, and so another area that we come across is whereby there has been perhaps 3 or 4 similar boilers, and the applicant has tried to suggest that they want to incorporate some of the existing boilers as part of a bivalent system and then remove the other boilers. That's very difficult to prove that boilers of a similar age and apparently a similar condition, no evidence to suggest otherwise, that some of them are being removed because they're considered as end of life, whereas others, the applicant's trying to retain on the basis that they don't consider some of the others are actually not end of life. So the consistency around that is particularly important. And I mean, these are red lines these are proper lines in the sand that we have seen some applications that have just failed purely on this point around bivalent, or SAILEX have provided the opportunity for some kind of redesign, but it's very difficult for that to be done in very tight timelines as you're going through a due diligence process. And to be fair, it's very difficult for the technical assessor to have confidence that it will be done properly. So, so some other points around, if you like, some of the more technical considerations. Very important to lay out precisely how the system has been sized up. So this is the low carbon heating system has been sized up. It's important to provide clear layout of heat loss calculations, because that, and again, to an extent, not, there are question marks about whether this is strictly, a sort of the right approach, but there is a requirement for detailed heat loss calculations to be undertaken as part of the application. SAILEX have got their own heat loss tool, which does work. It can get very messy for complex buildings, and generally, as the buildings get more complex with a lot of modular areas within the buildings, then it may be better to consider asking whoever is supporting you to undertake some dynamic simulation modeling. For example, using IES or the Passive House software or the Design Builder Energy Plus software, all of which are approved softwares to do that modeling. But it's critical to prove the heat loss and how that has been contributed to how you've sized the scheme, including any other assumptions around safety factors, how you've done heat loss calculations or heat demand calculations, I should say, around swimming pools, for example. So that needs to be well laid out and easy enough for the technical assessors to follow. We touched on DNO a couple of times in terms of the district network operator. Again, this is becoming more and more of a red line for Salex because of the number of abandonments that's been, and associated with problems with the DNO and upgrading of supply capacity. So as a bare minimum, Salex will be expecting evidence of engagement with the DNO. Perhaps that's been in the form of a surgery with the DNO, breakdown of calculations in terms of how any potential additional supply capacity has been calculated. And that's what I said earlier, that even though REBA stage 2 HDPs for a number of the criteria will suffice, you really are going into REBA stage 3 to do some of the detailed calculations based upon product data from heat pumps, predominantly so you can lay that out and demonstrate that you are engaging with the DNO. So that's a really critical element. So touching on, just summarising some of the key requirements for the heat decarbonisation plans. I'm not going to go through them all, but the whole building approach is important, as we've mentioned before. What I would say is that if you have a building that you've already done a lot of upgrades to, or it's a relatively new building, and you need to outline that and describe what improvements have already been made to the building. So it's not absolutely necessary for you to include, for example, building fabric improvements to reduce heat loss within the application, but it is critical that you explain why you've not included them, and to give Salex the confidence that actually that building is fit for purpose to facilitate a lower temperature heating distribution system as part of a heat pump solution. I've already talked about the next two bullets. So some specific areas of details is a good description of existing systems, specifically heating and hot water systems. If you have schematics of the existing system, then that's good to include. And the development of schematics, these being low temperature mechanical schematics, is very desirable. If you can't do that, then a good description of the proposed new low carbon heating solution is required. Sufficient evidence that the spatial layouts have been properly addressed and are well known, and there is a solution. And as I mentioned before, the approach to demand capacity calculations and lay those out. Cost sheets, well laid out cost sheets, supporting cost sheets are important, including like for like costs. So this is the costs if you were to replace the boiler, if you were to replace the boilers with new boilers, just for a comparison cost, because that's fundamentally where that 12% retention comes from. That say, let's take the view, that you should be deducting in any case how much it would cost you to replace the existing boilers with other boilers. So they do look for evidence of that. We don't necessarily subscribe to getting quotations, simply because obviously, potentially wasting contractors' time. But again, if you have a maintenance incumbent, then that's the way, you could get some cost that way as well. Ensure that the detailed savings calculations are well laid out on there, and that they are properly sequenced. So any reduction in from fabric measures, for example, that they are sequenced with the low carbon heating solution as part of section 4, the support tool. Make sure you include risk registers and programs. Again, the program is critical to giving Salex the confidence that you will be able to deliver this project within the timelines. The last thing that Salex wants is a situation where where the funding cannot be spent before the end of the March deadline. Within the HDPs, the heat decarbonisation plans, it's good if you can align some of the sections with the PSDS application process. Sorry, the application template. So that just makes it much easier for the assessor to follow the relevant sections within the HDP, and I'll align it with the application form. Anything that you can do to make the assessor's life a bit easier is a positive thing to do, and will improve the chances of your application successfully coming through due diligence. And clear indexing as well. So again, that the technical assessors know exactly which sections of the report or evidence pack they need to go to. So another point to pick up is the fact that you don't have to provide a solution that completely removes all your fossil fuel boilers within a particular building or section of building. So for example, if you've got a separate domestic hot water heating system, then those you don't want to replace the fossil fuel boilers on those for whatever reason, you just want to tackle the boilers on the heating low temperature hot water system, then you can just put an application in for the heating circuit. So that's something to be aware of. That it's also important to note that any energy efficiency measures that are not associated with a part of the building, that you are not replacing the fossil fuel boiler, or will not be eligible. So if you've got two parts of a building and you're including, for example, solar PV on a part of the building that you're not replacing the boilers, then that would not be eligible. And it's really important that you're clear about which areas of the system and the exact modifications that you're proposing, that they are made clear within the descriptions or the schematics within the heat decarbonisation plan. So some of these points we've already mentioned. Again, some evidence about like-for-like costs, evidence about the seasonal coefficients of performance that have been using, preferably with typical example or the actual data sheets from the heat pumps. I've mentioned before about making sure that the savings are correctly sequenced in step 4 of the application form, and ensure that the project programs have realistic timelines. And again, some of the other guys, Chris and Andrew, were picking up on, think about all aspects of the project. It's not just about delivery of equipment, it's all the procurement activities, the setting up of the sites, all the prelims associated with that, etc., time for commissioning and handover activities. So make sure that you've considered the whole program, the lifetime of the project. So just summarizing in terms of the top tips. Again, we've said some of these, but ensure that you understand as well as possible what's in the guidance, attended the Q&A sessions, prioritize your portfolio, strive for getting certain aspects of REBA stage 3 where possible. Don't take risks with your application. So, you might have a list of X number of buildings, and you might have one building in there which has non-eligible fossil fuel boilers, and actually having one DUF aspect could actually impact on the whole application. So do not take any risks with what you're including in there. Focus on the quality of the buildings and how you prioritize the buildings as opposed to quantity. And think about, for example, if you were going to put in a large application with lots of buildings, how would you manage that program? So far better to focus on some of your higher priority buildings, less buildings perhaps, and be able to put in a much stronger application for those buildings. You might want to run various scenarios to check what is the best funding outcome. So that's the balance between putting in other measures versus what you could get maximum funding for. So do some scenario planning around that, which comes back to giving yourself plenty of time for these applications. Getting the application in as early as possible. We talked about that. End of life criteria of boilers, existing boilers, is critical. Be clear about the boundaries and a good description of your boundaries. Put your robust heat loss calculations in. It's not a bad idea, and you can put it within the HDP to check some of the findings against, for example, BISRA Blue Book technical benchmarks. Again, it just adds more credence to that. Detailed descriptions, schematics where possible, engagement early with the DNO, realistic programs, key milestones and areas of risks, clear cost breakdowns. Don't ignore the need for robust procurement planning, governance, etc., which has been picked up in the two previous presentations. And as I say, ensure that the data is well prepared and well presented, that it's in a logical format, aligns with the PSDS, and it's well indexed. That is really going to be helpful for the technical assessors and will make it much easier, and in my opinion will increase the chances of success. Okay, right, thank you very much. Sorry if I've run over a little bit. I'm not sure if I have, Eddie, but sorry if I have.
Well, it was good information, Glyn, and really helpful to get an insight from the technical assessment side, because a lot of these things I'm sure come up regularly when you're looking at projects.
Absolutely, yeah. We see consistently the same sorts of issues. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Now, somebody that's probably been in the other side of the technical assessment regularly, Equans is a household name for much of the work that we get involved in, and I'm going to invite Tim to talk to us about their experience. Thanks, Tim.
With me. So I haven't managed. Bear with me, I'm trying to share this. Having issues with sharing my presentation. So what I'll do is go through it in a logical sort of way and share it later on when I've got the IT capability. So we're Equans. We are if you like, a full turnkey partner. We take clients all the way from feasibility to REBA 5 and 6 to final delivery on site. In terms of Equans overall, we're in 17 countries and we employ 74,000 employees. Geographical split is effectively all around the world. Carbon solutions engineers, I represent the north for Equans, which includes Northwest, Cumbria, Northern Ireland and Northeast. So I have carbon solutions engineers throughout those regions, sustainability experts in thermal modelling, RD-SAP, PAS 2030, 35 and PAS 2038, analysts, compliance officers and supply chain support from Equans. So effectively, our service is full management, both in education, public buildings, refurbishment and sustainability, new build, and also renewables. Since the launch of PSDS, we have supported over £95 million worth of delivery work, and that's including the managing of the full turnkey design solution. Now, after both Chris, Glyn, and Andrew, I feel like I'm coming onto a concert where they've sang all my greatest hits. So what I'll try and do is pick out some different type of aspects in terms of, if you like, the delivery side and what needs to be transposed into the application. For me, it's pretty important to understand not only the dynamics and definitions and requirements of the application form, it's also really important to understand delivery on site and what you have to take into account. And you need to put that into the application, or at least risk assess it. So for me, the benefits of PSDS funding are worldwide climate objectives, social value, well-being, which should be built in into your application. It releases ambition and opportunity, and allows local authorities, education, and bodies who's making the application to have no regrets in what they're doing. Supply chain development, we started this in 2020, and from 2020 to near on mid-2023, I've seen a massive increase in capability, which is really important, and capacity. That's not only in the plant, but also in the quality of the consultants that are out there. It has also created a demand for technological improvement and continuous improvement in terms of their efficiency. It pushes fabric first, which I believe, and most people believe, is the most important aspects. And of course, the financial incentive to do this for local authorities. I will say that on PSDS1, which we're involved in, the funding was £500 per lifetime tonne. It's now 325. So from 500 to 325 in the 3 years, which we have experienced, if you like, economic implosion and inflation, not only do local authorities have to deal with a reduction in potential funding, but also in inflation, which is in the marketplace, sometimes in excess of 15%. It allows applicants to get their fabric right first, and also consider new innovations and new technologies. So there's a whole myriad of benefits there. Mostly, I think, if you like, the push to allow applicants to actually start doing this work and trying to hit the targets. In terms of where we go, in terms of the challenges, and these are the challenges we've seen and perhaps should be considered in the application, and have been mirrored by Andrew, Chris, and Glyn, is planning determination. You need to get that right. Don't forget there is a winter in every year. Electrical capacity and sequencing. Any upgrades, as mentioned before, require installation and commissioning dates, or at least that surgery to allow you to inform the application. A difference, and I think it came across from PSDS1 to PSDS3, is that you were allowed bivalent right at the start. Now it's full decarbonisation of heat and hot water. In our experience, again, from 500 to 325, that last 10% of peak load of your buildings actually costs 3 times more capital to achieve in terms of the install, the defining the heat load, all those sort of aspects. It's as become really a bit more challenging for all of you. Every building has its proprietary requirements, and each building should be taken as an individual project, regardless of whether you're putting all the projects in one application. The diversity of buildings that we've delivered and assisted in applications go from swimming pools, sports centres, theatres, community centres, factory units. So each one of those have its individual thermal models, thermal calculations, and also fabric considerations. In terms of the client, we try and influence the CapEx versus OpEx. Don't forget the maintenance strategy and inflation. Working in live environments, what you need to do in terms of management liaison, stakeholder engagement, I think that should be identified within the application. Ensure early review of existing services. Material procurement, long lead times, already been mentioned, I think, by Glyn. In 2021, within a space of 10 weeks, heat pumps in excess of 75 kilowatts went from 12 weeks to 28 weeks. So all that needs to be considered and informed within the application. And also the recruitment of experienced designers and consultants, which is really quite important. Getting it right, long-term decarbonisation plan. It has to demonstrate ambition and have executive support. Again, mirrored from the other guys, establish a governance structure within your client and within the contractor and within your consultants as well. A credible program, including spend profiles, hierarchy. As I said before, don't forget the seasonal challenges in that program and identify the most effective buildings. Some of the clients that we've dealt with have identified what we call anchor buildings. Those are, if you like, the sinners, the big gas burners. Perhaps it should be considered to have a heat decarbonisation plan orientating around those anchor buildings. You'd have to also have a full understanding of the risks and carbon accounting. You need to have a full asset knowledge and third-party verification, or at least demonstrate that you have that in line. Procurement, procure the right partners and technology, and don't forget BMS. BMS is really important. On a number of buildings that we've dealt with, in excess of 40, you have various BMS suppliers and maintenance engineers. Those organizations need to be engaged in an early stage. Compliance to the application requirements, affordability, understand what you can afford over and above the £325 per tonne. For me, I think, if possible, is go for the low carbon skills fund, because that is a significant advantage. It allows you to go up to full REBA 3, effectively getting oven ready for this application. But if you haven't got that skills fund, for me, getting up to a good REBA 2 with a good thermal model would demonstrate your full understanding of the requirements of that building and therefore the measures that need to be effective to achieve the carbon reduction. Engagement with the DNO, always, and also indicate that within the program. Watch out for formulas in the applications, don't overwrite them. Make compliance in all the supporting documentation, the appendices. Make sure you got those templates filled out. And I've also, on the theme of the final application, is I call it the tails with effect. So I have 4 daughters, of which 3 out of 4 daughters managed to get Taylor Swift tickets on the internet. It is that important to be ready or have a teenage daughter at your side to press that button and upload those documents. Because as said before, previous presenters, normally over the last four applications we've done, it's between 11 and 12 minutes where the fund has been taken up. In terms of what we do as well, maybe worth considering, we partner with a company called HighSoft, which we got a software chair that also, if you like, is third-party verification of REBA 2 or stroke 3 of your heat source, sizing of the heat source, and the associated hydraulics. Effectively, the optimization of system design through HighSoft gives us the lowest possible capital and operational costs. And when we're talking about operational costs, please consider as clients that electricity is still at a higher rate than gas, and that you should challenge your partners and your design consultants to get that design optimized to increase the coefficient of performance in excess of 3. And I put my hand up, it's not always possible, but at least it's eyes wide open how much the running costs will be. So through that optimization procedure, we can determine the actual running costs of the systems. So for want of not going over some of the stuff, the technical stuff in terms of boilers, which I think you're fully aware of, I'll give you an example of the clients that we deal with. We deal with Northumberland University, which we've installed almost 1 megawatt of an air source heat pump. That was in PSDS 2, a really cool design, which is, I call it a super hybrid, effectively taking up 98% of the heat load backed up by 1 small boiler. We've dealt with Rochdale Borough Council, Cheshire, and also Manchester, installing myriad of different fabric improvements and also renewables. I will say that PVs are not eligible within the application. However, please consider PVs. Now, in general, they wash their face in terms of capital costs between 8 and 10 years, but it will also give you that additional comfort of the affordability of running these heat pumps. So in conjunction with your decarbonisation plans, please don't discount the advantages you can get out of PVs. And that is about it, because you don't want to hear about redundancy of boilers and resilience and redundancy, because that's already been covered.
Thanks, Tim. That was fantastic. I think the points about optimization and control are really valid, and it's something that seems at times to be overlooked, and it has such an impact on the legacy from the programme. So that was really insightful. Thanks very much. So last but not least, I'm going to call on Alex from Anthesis. Anthesis have provided support in an awful lot of programmes, and it's going to be interesting to see what advice Alex is going to give us on PSDS.
Hi, can you see me and my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Great. Hi, my name is Alex Zardis. I'm working for Anthesis Group. We are a sustainability consultancy, and I work in the energy systems team, working on a multitude of energy solutions and decarbonisation and energy efficiency schemes. And I will go on to that in a second. So just a bit of a short explanation. We work in over 40 countries with over 1,000 consultants over a broad range of services. And it was quite hard for me to decide what to talk about as going on fifth in the run of speakers. Is I figured I might repeat what everyone else was saying and sound like a bit of a broken record, just going over and over. So hopefully I won't do that too much, and I'll try to cover different material, because as Andrew, Chris, Glyn and Tim have thankfully mentioned, the main sort of topics I believe have already been covered. So we're looking at a sort of from a benchmarking point of view, we're really seeing a move towards modern, low carbon, energy efficient buildings, and the difficulty is getting there because often we're going from quite a high demand building to what we want to aspire to is a low demand one. So from the parameters on the screen, we're going to sort of a baseline to where we really want to get to is really high energy efficiency, low heating demand, low heat loss, use of renewable energy, and low carbon heat sources. So I thought I would show some examples of what we're sort of dealing with on the site, because I as a part of the design team, I work with the actual creation of the design packages, the energy, the auditing, and sometimes the scoping of the projects even. So I'm going to site. I'm not managing it. Actually I am sometimes, but you know, these are all photos that I've taken. So some of the issues we see are so the top left photo would be lack of access to the existing installation. So sometimes with the applications we don't have record drawings, and actually even finding where the installation is sometimes difficult because pipework routes are often embedded or into the concrete floors, or they're hidden behind all of the wall partitions, and you can't actually always, without having an intrusive survey over many days, get access to everything. So you sometimes have to go from the plant room outwards. And that goes for the building fabric as well. You really, to have the highest quality, you almost want to you want to have a sort of a boroscope sample of the building fabric to understand exactly how the real structure of the external wall, which in some cases may be, if the building is of an age, and it often is, that's why we're dealing with these applications, that there is no record drawing on the exact build up. That gives us a real indication of the depth of the cavity, if it's empty, if it's already filled, etc. Obviously there are visual clues that we use to assume and to define this based on what we can actually see. So as everyone knows, it's obvious whether a wall is well, obvious to every building services engineers and construction professionals, whether a wall is a solid wall or a cavity wall by the brick layout. Going on further to speak about the roof build-up with intrusive and non-intrusive surveys, without going into roof loft voids or accessing the roof space. Sometimes it can present a problem with the structural integrity of the roof. For example, I worked on a project where a solar PV proposal fell through because there was, despite it being a concrete framed building, the roof of the building was the structure, which is in the top right photo, which is the timber and sort of just a thin almost crinkle sheet cover and asphalt on top of it. So it's wasn't able to provide the structural support for a solar PV system, which even with a weight distribution, sort of the Bigfoot system, still exceeded what the structural engineers who surveyed the building thought that the roof could support. So that's another area where in-depth knowledge of the building facilitates the understanding of what proposals will work on the site. And this is where I believe Tim mentioned it very correctly, is that having that low carbon skills fund to develop that design and have the professional undertake the survey and develop the proposal helps the application have credibility and a chance of success, because it shows that the scheme has been validated, it's going to work. So the bottom right photo is about existing plants. Sometimes there's extra costs associated with the removal and decommissioning of plant, especially where they're larger systems. The bottom photo is the upgrading mains electricity supplies. This has been mentioned many times, is one of the areas where this can knock a project on the head. I've worked on one project where at the feasibility stage, as in without a low carbon skills fund and a stage 3 design developed for the site, it was sort of mentioned, yes, this site for an SLC pump installation will need the electricity supply to be upgraded to a certain amount of amps and the supply to be upgraded to the building. But without having that exact definition of the system size and going to the DNO, only when it was at the sort of the stage 3 design and the actual tendering of the project was it found out that the DNO cost was a 6-figure sum. I can't remember exactly, but something in the range of £300,000, because the building was at the sort of the end of the supply line for the electricity cable, and it was only a small domestic connection, despite it being a non-domestic building. So that, and then it went under a train bridge as well, so they had to diamond drill under and under the train tracks, and it knocked the projects on the head, and that ended up actually going to sort of a biomass installation proposal. The bottom right is just an example where the complete lack of record drawings can it just increases the time that needs to be invested into developing a solid proposal. These are examples of the should explain that as from the producing the application. This is essentially some of the phases of essentially myself and other colleagues going through this application stage. We're doing the energy analysis, the many condition surveys, sort of low carbon heating proposals. So if you were to generalize, I would say the top half is what you would assume to receive as part of a typical application without this stage 3, whereas the bottom half is what you would assume to be producing as part of the developed design, either using internal funding or through the low carbon skills fund to solidify the application and to validate and quantify exactly what will happen with the project. So for a feasibility study style report, you have to make assumptions and to quantify based on the main principles of the system, whereas on the bottom half you increase the granularity and you in a sense you confirm it. So that this is where you reduce the gap between what you would assume a certain price to be to what actually happens. And if you do this, I'm sure the speakers will agree, you'll see that the tender return figures are much larger in difference than the projects where there's that stage 3. Because as you see, if I go to the next slide, ooh, I'm missing a slide. This is it. In the middle slide, you see the sort of a costing breakdown, whereas you can quantify it more exactly than in the feasibility stage, where you still have unknowns in terms of the exact system size, the exact system arrangement, and it tends to be from my experience, quite large increases in the cost responses from tendering contractors, and that then presents this case where the size of the additional funding that has to be met from your organisation is larger, and you have to go to sort of the board of directors and the departments to discuss this and see whether the project can actually go forward or not. So yeah, the bottom right is sort of the evidence of planning permission requirements. So with the low carbon skills fund, you can sort of have this undertaken, whereas otherwise it can sort of be put towards this stage where post funding this has gone through, and that increases the risk of additional items that need to be costed for not being included, for example, acoustic screens particularly. And then the build up of the acoustic screens. I've been in one project where it was required that it was to be an acoustic screen was to be made in brick for aesthetic reasons, and then there's a whole lots of time and people's money effectively to go through a sort of a process where they debated whether it was necessary, and to prove that from a financial point of view it was going to be very unproductive to construct a brick wall instead of timber closed high pack density timber screen. So there's just some of these things that can crop up, and the technical specification, the writing of the technical specification at this stage 3 stage, if you want to call it, or the low carbon skills fund, it enables the procurement route and the appointing of a contractor to be done in the way that it needs to be done, and to give it the time that it should be. So those are some of the big list items in terms of the process, and I'll run through some of the drawbacks and sort of the issues that I've seen. That's obviously the over the sort of repeated topics, but I just wanted to mention that I went to a particularly interesting set of presentations where people, sort of like a TED talk, where people come on stage, but just to share with people the experience of their failures, because people learn from issues and failures in life, or so it's always good to share this. So hopefully people will learn from this. So yeah, again, people have said it over and over again, choosing the sites and the scope correctly. One thing I'll mention that I don't think has been mentioned so far is that I have seen the projects that I've worked on where the proposal has been involving the replacement or upgrading of an oil boiler system has almost had uniform success over gas boilers, especially modern gas boiler systems. So I've worked on several projects where they've been converting oil-fired boilers to modern systems, and they tend to have lots of success. So if any organisations have those buildings with oil-fired boilers, then I would suggest to prioritise those, as well as looking at the energy intensity per square metre for those sinful sites, as Tim mentioned. The project budgeting, one thing that I've seen come up on many projects is that once the funding and the budgeting internally is set, the project tender contractors come back with their prices, and they're overpriced to the expectations of the funding and the agreed sort of internal contributions. So you often see this value engineering stage and the reduction of scope, and even elements of the scope falling out that aren't related to the headline items. So it's essential to have a project team that's invested in having not the all singing, all dancing, but a practical system that works and achieves the largest amount of carbon reduction with the system that's appropriately designed. And I think having the right project team on that is absolutely critical. Yeah, project scope underneath it. So these are the issues that we've discussed about not bringing on acousticians, planners, DNO services and structural engineers at early stages. Another thing that's cropped up in a project is the appreciation of the connection of all of the services. So I've seen some feasibility studies without any electrical appraisal done on them. I've seen some projects where the cold water design and sort of the requirement to actually reroute and reconnect the cold water connections to several parts of the new system has sort of come up. So this is just again the right project team that have the understanding of all of these areas. And the last comment is just a comment on I'd say the amount of skilling up that has had to be done in the industry. I've been working on this sort of PSDS scheme since the first round, and I think even everyone will agree that everyone has had to pick up some area that they weren't necessarily working in before. I think a lot of engineers, especially whether they focused on pure design and sort of cable sizing or pipe sizing, now they have to have appreciation of energy management and energy usage over a year rather than a peak instantaneous energy. So it's been interesting that the industry has had to sort of pick this up, but we do have an acute skill shortage. It is, I'm sure everyone will agree that when projects are going out to tender, not everybody is showered in contractors out there. There's certain ones that are quite leaders in the field, and you can see the quality in it, and then there's others that they still haven't had the experience, because we're going into a new generation of this system design, where we've gone from coal-fired boilers, oil-fired boilers, the gas-fired boilers, and now we're getting to electricity refrigeration-based systems. So it's a sort of we've gone from this sort of Victorian engineering of coal and oil to, I don't know what you call this generation, but we're all going into it now, and it's an exciting place to be. So yeah, hope everyone has good luck in their applications, and there's time for questions if people want them.
That's fantastic, Alex. I'm particularly interested in the skills thing. One of the key parts of this could be to try and drive skills forward, and there could be added benefit comes out of that. So if that is the case, then probably everyone needs to be more aware and work harder with that to try and make sure that these skills are available.
Yeah, exactly. I've seen one of the questions come up saying, is an in-depth building audit essential for a good application? I'd say it depends on the amount of knowledge of I guess the estates management and facilities management teams have, and the whether they can produce a feasibility study and a PSDS application without it. I'd say it helps. We're sort of, it's almost our bread and butter now to support. I think everybody on this call would appreciate that. It's quite an intricate process to develop these applications. So the more detail, the better.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd say especially considering if there's a particularly poorly performing buildings, or buildings that have still using oil-fired boilers. Those are wants to prioritise. So that's
Great. Thank you.
Yes.
Well, I'll invite people to ask questions now. If you want to put your hand up, that would be really helpful. And there's been an awful lot in that, and I think a lot of value from the discussion that's been had. So I'm sure there'll be a few things that people have crossed their mind about what help they need, and particularly with the tips and pointers that have come forward. So if anyone's got a question, raise your hand. Wow, I think you've wowed the crowd. I have asked a couple of questions along the way. If I can maybe highlight these to begin with. Tim, do you think that programming early on is one of the key aspects of being able to deliver a successful program?
Yeah, I really do, and part of the programming process is the risk assessment on all the aspects that affect a program. The most important thing is the funding deadline dates, and that program has to be practical and realistic, and apologies for generalizing here. So the SALIC review and actually understand that you've thought about the program and it is practical and realistic, because they want that funding out of the door and delivered by March 31st of March. Simple as that.
Yeah, thank you. Glyn, do you think that there's still time for people to get a project into PSDS?
I think they're cutting it fine. I think it depends. What I mean by that, Eddie, is if there's plenty of background information available, good data, if the client is saying, look, we've identified these 2 buildings, that's why we've identified these 2 buildings, or we've identified these 4 buildings, they are high priority. We know that we've got good data about the boilers, the age of the boilers. You know, we know what the supply capacity, degree supply capacity is. We know what the max demand is. So in other words, if there is the basic information available, and the client's not expecting too much of an advisor or a consultant, whoever they're interfacing with, then I think there's still time to get enough information, not necessarily of complete, fancy, nice HDP report, but enough supporting evidence information available to stand the chance of submitting an application that proves to be successful.
Okay, well, I suppose that the follow-on from that for everyone is, do you think there's enough resources available out there just now? Andrew, do you think that would be something that could be supported?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we actually had a conversation with someone yesterday, just that exact question: can you support us in 8 weeks effectively? And ultimately, the answer is yes, we can give it a go. But exactly what Glyn was saying, just in terms of how far along are you, what's your sort of internal understanding, what's access to data? It's just asking some pointed RFIs. All the good stuff we talked about today. Where are you starting from in terms of having a dedicated sort of resource to it to support the consultant team really pull things together? But I think there is a reasonable amount of experience and resource still out there. Obviously, there's some low carbon skills funds that have been going on from the previous round, so it might be that some of those have come to an end. Some of those was obviously still being supported up to the application stage. We've certainly got some resource at the moment. I think this is one of the key programs at the moment, and people are keen to support these programs. It's where the funding's coming from. There is actually quite a lot of inertia that we're finding in some of the other projects at the moment, and private sector challenges in terms of where to get the funding for this type of thing. So the public sector is still very much the exemplar here and making the biggest moves. So I think the resources are there for it if you're coming to the right people.
Great. Chris, you were going to come in there, although I wasn't wanting to ask you about early preparation, if that's a key thing.
Yeah, I was just going to come in terms of the skills and capacity. I think there's a lot to be said about there's a will from the public sector to kind of meet these funding deadlines and take projects forward. But in a lot of cases, a lot of kind of the people that are successful with PSDS are those that are repeatedly successful. And there's quite a lot of organisations that still kind of struggle with the in-house capacity mainly, rather than the actual experience to deliver on these projects and get applications through. There is also a slight disparity between those that have probably recently found out that they've got LCSF at the end of July, and then trying to get applications through for this window. It's technically feasible to get a feasibility study in that time frame. It's quite difficult if they're asking for things like REPA Stage 3 and REPA Stage 4 design, which strictly aren't necessary for PSDS applications. So I think it's sometimes trying to match up what you want for what you've been given from LCSF and actually what you need for PSDS is another thing to rationalise, because actually we've seen many successful applications on the back of kind of REPA Stage 2 type design.
Good. I've just got a final question. The Northwest hasn't done very well. Do you feel that there's anything that could be helping to support that, or do you think there's any reasons that that could be the case, and what you could do to help that? Tim, you're on mute.
If I can just reverse a bit, in terms of not having that LCSF budget also puts pressure on the authority or the applicant getting that information, employing consultants, employing surveyors, etc. It actually costs money. Or as mentioned previously, there might be a partner who goes at risk. There's not too many of those about. So in terms of the financial considerations of making those applications without financial help is a challenge to clients. In terms of the Northwest and PSDS, I would agree. In our experience, the Northeast and certain parts of Cumbria have been really successful in their applications. I have seen some of the applications that have been put in the Northwest, and effectively a fair amount of them haven't complied with the application. And that's not due to the competency of the client. It was a support network in 1, 2 and early 3 that wasn't available, which we got now with you guys and Salix. I think there's ambition, the same ambition in the Northwest to decarbonise and to utilise grant funding. I just think the support network in the Northwest wasn't as evident as in the other regions. That's maybe one of the reasons.
Okay, well, that's been really useful. And I thank everybody for your time today. I think it's been really helpful for everyone, and it's good to see that there is that expertise available for people that are coming into PSDS. I'll give a couple of plugs at the end. I think just if they need help, independent help, the hub is on hand to do that, and feel free to contact us. And the last thing I would say is this is a part of a series, a couple of other events coming up. So if you want to join them, feel free. So thanks very much, everyone. I really appreciate all your time and effort, and thanks for